Great. So I'm going to get us started here and you start rolling.
We're ready to go.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us virtually for this December 1st, 2021 meeting of the Capital Area Architectural and Planning Board. I now call this meeting to order. As the chair of the CAP board, I again determined that we would be best served by a virtual meeting with the continued high levels of COVID-19 transmission across the state of Minnesota. And I hope we'll all be able to be together in person as we come into the new year. I also want to begin with some appreciation as well for our board members. This has been a significant amount of time that you've been devoting in your participation, especially with our second meeting in less than 2 weeks. We will absolutely give you a reprieve from some of these conversations as we head into next month, but just wanted to name that I know that you all have been working very hard, and I am so appreciative of it. So members of the public can view this meeting via live stream on the board's YouTube channel, and a recording of this meeting will be posted on that site following today's meeting. If you wish to be recognized during the meeting, please use the raise hand function at the top of your screen. And if that fails, you can use the chat here as well. But for any members of the public who may be viewing this meeting, we want to make sure that those comments are used specifically to address technology issues so that the public does not miss out on any part of this discussion. As has been the practice of our virtual meetings, we will determine if a quorum is present by conducting a roll call. In addition to establishing that a quorum is present, I would like to use another opportunity just to get to learn a little bit more about one another. So as today marks the beginning of meteorological winter, as many of you, I'm sure, have marked on your calendar. And when you indicate that you are present, please also share your favorite wintertime activity or tradition, and then maybe briefly what you enjoy about it. I will start off as the chair here. My favorite wintertime activity now as a grown-up with an 8-year-old is sledding. The incredible joy that she gets from sledding is really fun. The unexpected workout of climbing back up that hill is also really something, but that's my favorite thing, is just to see winter through my kiddo's eyes. And while she'll still hang out with me until she's like 13 and I'm no longer cool. So with that, I'm going to go through here. We'll start with Dr. Kate Bean. Okay, it doesn't appear as she is on yet. Alicia Belton.
Good morning. Present. And my favorite activity, that's a good one. I think I discovered a new one last year. We got some snowshoes. And so we started snowshoeing. We thought it was going to be a family activity. The kids, not so much. So my husband and I, we'd go out Sunday afternoons and snowshoe just around the lake, and that was fun. So yeah, that's one of my new favorites.
I love it. Thank you. Elaine Fink.
I have to admit I don't have any great love for any of the outdoor sports at this age. However, I do ballet dance twice a week, every week, summer or winter, and I would have to put that down as my favorite.
I'm so glad I asked this question, and then that's what you shared with us. That's I love it. Thank you, Elaine. Representative Freiberg.
Hi, I'm present. My favorite winter activity might also be my favorite spring, summer, and autumn activity, but I'm going to say it anyway. It's geocaching. In the winter, though, it presents unique challenges, but I enjoy those challenges. I like trying to dig through the snow sometimes and find things.
I'm proud of myself that I knew that answer already, Representative Freiberg, after being the other rep in Golden Valley. Thank you. Next, we've got James Garrett Jr. Who is not on yet. Let's go to Don Grundhauser. And welcome, Don. We're so excited to have you.
Well, thank you. I enjoy my winters down in Arizona, and I've been going there for the last 5-6 years, and I enjoy laying on the, not on the beach, but by the pool and getting a little suntan and enjoying the warm weather down there. I really don't have any winter thing because I pretty much spend a lot of time in Arizona.
Oh, Don, rub it in. Thank you for that. Put on sunblock. Representative Hertaz.
Well, good morning. I'm present, and my wintertime activities that I've always enjoyed has been late season pheasant hunting, archery, snowmobiling, ice fishing. But more of recent, 15 years ago, I too, like the previous gentleman, bought a home in Scottsdale area of Arizona 15 years ago, and I now later in life as a boomer prefer to go down there and get out of the cold. So Saturday I will be there.
We are all jealous, Representative. James McLean.
Hey, good morning. The first thing that came to mind, Madam Chair, was sledding as well. I'm also a big fan, but because that is taken, I'll give a little bit more unorthodox answer. I recently became a huge fan of pickleball, more of a summer activity, or at least how I was doing it outdoors. So I'm currently scouting out indoor locations to play pickleball. I've found a couple promising options, but still have some work to do on that front so I can continue through the winter.
Keep us posted, Mr. McLean. Appreciate that. Let's see, Senator Nelson. Doesn't appear the senator is on yet. Senator Pappas.
Hi, I hate to be repetitive, but I also picked up snowshoeing last year. And because the snow is unpredictable and my schedule is unpredictable and I live downtown, I would snowshoe around the Capitol Mall. And it's lovely to do that. I carry my snowshoes 2 blocks and put them on, and then I can just go right around the mall.
So you're the one that makes those tracks.
We found you out. That's wonderful. Thanks, Senator. Daniel Yang.
Morning, folks. Present. During COVID, a group of fellas and I started doing bonfires, outdoor bonfires in the winter. And so I think we're excited to continue that tradition. And it's chilly and warm and everything great about Minnesota, I think. So thanks.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, thank you all for sharing, from snowshoeing to ballet to pickleball to catching some rays by the pool in Arizona. I appreciate the diversity of experiences here. And it's fun just to know a little bit more about each other when we have to keep meeting virtually. I appreciate these small ways that we can build community. I'm now going to hand it over to the Executive Secretary to provide a brief overview of what we will, oh, I'm so sorry. Dr. Bean, thank you so much for popping up in the chat. I will come to you, Dr. Kate Bean.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. My apologies for being a few minutes late, but I got the gist of what I think the question was, which is about winter activities. My favorite winter activity used to be riding horses. As long as it was 10 degrees, I would be out riding. I used to lease a horse out at White Bear Lake, and that was my favorite thing to do. Don't have much time for that these days, and so I would have to say sledding. Growing up in Nebraska, I did not know how to sled because it's very flat, but my husband has taught me and our children well, and it is quite a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank you. We should have a sled date for our kiddos. I think that would be fun. It looks like Senator Pappas is having some connection issues. How can I dial in for sound? I can keep my video. I will go ahead and ask.
There is a screen that gave me a number, so I can go ahead and do that.
Wonderful. And then
Thanks.
We will admit you when you call in. Thank you so much. Okay, so Executive Secretary, I am going to turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. And good to see everyone today. We have, if we could quickly pull up the agenda. We just have a few topics we're covering today. We're going to start by following up on discussion of the Commemorative Works rulemaking that we began at our meeting 2 weeks ago. And we'll cover where we're at in the rulemaking process, how the requests for comments are coming, and then focus on some items that have been brought up that we want to continue to discuss, as well as any new things that people have. After we are done with that, we're going to get an update on the Bethesda site. And then Peter Musty, our zoning administrator and principal planner, put together a memo with some updates on some of our ongoing projects, and he will be open to any questions that any of you have on those. Thank you. So with that, if you could just continue with the slides, Peter. All right, so Commemorative Works rulemaking. As you all know, we're in the midst of going through a rulemaking process to update the Commemorative Works rules and policy that the CAAPB board has been using for a number of years. Now, I want to clarify, because I sent a document shortly before the meeting, that the current rules that we have on Commemorative Works are brief, and they then incorporate by reference a document that lays out in more detail what criteria are looked at, what the steps are going through the process, etc. And so that has been what's been used, but the portion in the rules is very brief. And so when you saw the changes to the rulemaking that the Revisor put together, you'll only notice at the very beginning after the definition section, a handful of lines that are crossed out, and then the addition of rules related to modification and removal, as well as rules that summarize what has been in the ongoing policy document for additions. We have a docket number. The administrative law judge is scheduled for a hearing on January 18th. So that's where we're at. Next. So the public comments we've been getting, as you know, the bulk of the public engagement was conducted by the 2 task forces that worked through last year and into this year. And then in mid-October, we posted, as part of the official rulemaking, a request for comments portal on the Office of Administrative Hearing website. As of this morning, we've gotten 18 responses. For your packet, the previous meeting, I sent you the first 14 or so comments that had come in as of then. We've only gotten a few comments since then, but I did send you an updated list of all of those comments this morning. I also have received in my office 1 letter and 2 calls. All 3 of those came on the occasion of the day known as Columbus Day or Indigenous Peoples Day. People articulating the desire to know what was happening with Columbus and possibly wanting to see him return to the grounds. And the request for comments portal is staying open until December 16th. So I encourage you to continue to let people know about that and get out the word. So we're now getting to see Peter's emails and schedule. Okay.
Sorry, I was trying to support Senator Pappas logging in. I'll do that in a different screen.
Okay. And this is just a clip. If any of you haven't gone to the portal yet for the request for comments, this is one of the people I covered up her last name who submitted comments. And the comments are very thoughtful, so I really do encourage you to read through those. Next. So I sent a copy in the packet and by email, the Revisor recommended changes. So the rules, as written by the Revisor, follow this very strict format, which every line has a number, so it's easy to reference them. And when we're amending rules, as are proposed here, text that is being added is shown with an underline, and text that is being removed is crossed out. So I'm partly just showing this example up here for people perhaps that are following along with us today and have not themselves looked at the rules. Now, the types of changes the Minnesota Revisor made from the proposed rules that we sent to them that we talked about previously this fall, that the task force had put together, and then staff had provided some revisions. So you'd seen that version. It was then sent to the Revisor, and they clean it up so that the language follows the format of rules. So that's putting in the numbers. I want to give a big thanks to Laura Dotson, who with me went through the entire Revisor copy and compared it to what we'd sent them, because they don't do a red line version. And we noted every single change that had happened in the Revisor copy and evaluated those changes. And what we found is that there was a lot of changing of whether things were capitalized or not. And there was some wordsmithing, which just had the effect of tightening up the language. But we did not find a single instance where the change in any way impacted the intent or content of the language. Next. Or I'm going to pause here, actually, just that was a lot right there.
Yep, I want to make sure that if members have questions, Representative Hertas, please go right ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I did make a phone call before the meeting. What we're seeing on the slides is a little bit different than the packet that that I had printed out and received. I think most of us, at least who are legislators, are used to seeing underlined verbiage or language as new language and stuff that is being changed or stricken, being stricken through. I thought it may be difficult for some of the folks who are following along or may have had access to the same material to clearly identify what was being changed. And in the proposed changes to Commemorative Works rules language that was attached, I didn't see any of that. So I did call Merritt this morning and ask that that be made available. And in the first slide, what I'm seeing is different than what I have on the printed document, where there are, under item B, there's numbers 4 and 5 seem to be in addition to what the Revisor had done. So I guess I can wait with other comments regarding this section or even at the conclusion of the presentation of the proposed changes, and that probably would be most appropriate. But I just, for the benefit and transparency of everybody that's maybe watching or viewing, it seems a little difficult to follow along. But anyway, thank you for the slides. That's helping. But that wasn't what was attached in our memoranda packet.
Yes, can I jump
Yes,
in here?
thank you, Representative Hertas, Executive Secretary. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm sorry for any confusion. I should have labeled the sample that is on the slide that was in front of you that had 1 through 3 was purely an example of the format that they're in to explain to people that haven't seen a rules document. The proposed language you got in your packet and that is in the rules has 5 items. So there you see 3, but again, it was just a visual example. So I've created a document that compares sort of these key criteria to consider for adding works, and I've compared it to the existing language. And I, if it's okay, Peter, can share my screen. to show that. Is that all right?
You bet.
Okay, I'm going to do that now. All right, so as I mentioned at the beginning, the rules only
You
had
might make that just a little bit larger. I'm having a hard time seeing it with my glasses on.
So I'm going to show you here at the beginning. These are the rules, or what they call objectives, for determining whether commemorative works should be added. And this is in the existing policy document, which is what I said is referenced in the current rules, but it's in a standalone document that the details are at, and that's the document I sent you this morning. So in section 5, it has objectives for commemorations. And a reminder that the existing language here and the policy and rules altogether only address additions. They don't have any information or process for modification or removal. So here I've listed the objectives for commemoration. And Representative Hertas, when he called me, said, well, I want to make sure I understand what's the same or what changed. So if it's okay, I'm going to make this a little bit smaller. So starting at the top here with existing objectives, it has to be located, designed, and constructed appropriately. And so further in the policy, it talks about location and design criteria. And those location and design criteria are the ones that you see in the rules for additions. So the task force, decision process task force, pretty much copied and pasted the current language for what's considered in additions into the proposed rules. But I said to Representative Hertas, if people like, I can go through and do a line by line red line. It'll take a little time so you can see precisely what changed. The rules language is tighter. So what you see here is, if you look down at the bottom, the proposed rules. So you can see that in existing rules, something has to be of lasting significance for the people of Minnesota. And the revisor, that's in the proposed rules, and it says lasting statewide significance for Minnesotans. So they did a rewording. Number 3 in existing says it should reflect the diversity of Minnesota's people and provide a rich experience, broadening understanding of Minnesota's heritage and culture. That has been carried over to the current rules, and it says the work is respectful of the diversity of Minnesota. And then number 4 talks about the rich experience to broaden understanding. 4 and 5 and 6 are all items that are covered in other parts of the rulemaking document. They're not listed as conditions. They're listed under the things that need to happen during the process within the rules, as well as there is continuing forward in the proposed rules the prohibition on commemorating people that have not been deceased for 10 years or more. So the important thing that is added in the conditions is this bottom one, number 5. And it says the subject of the work is an individual, and the individual must be a Minnesotan with historical impact who is widely recognized and admired by Minnesotans and deceased for 10 years. That language is in there given the preponderance of public comment and input we got about how people see the Capitol grounds as important for reflecting Minnesota history and heritage and people. And so this proposes that for additions of work, and again, this would only be for additions of work, that moving forward, if there are individuals commemorated, that they be Minnesotans. So maybe I just want to pause for a moment and let people talk about that. And I'm also going to find a citation or current policy that says something very similar without saying it explicitly. So I'll turn this off.
Thank you for walking us through that, Executive Secretary. Did you have more to add here?
No, it's open for other people to.
Representative Hurtas, your hand is still up, so I want to make sure if you had anything else, that questions or clarifications, you have an opportunity to ask them.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And yes, in particular, it was this item that I had identified in a cursory review of the document that had been sent out to us that wasn't clear whether or not that was a condition before or had been added. I think in moving forward, I guess I would express some concern about whether or not works of art or commemorative art of individuals should be solely limited to Minnesotans. I think in terms of binding our nation together and the 50 states that we are presently, that there may be national figures that have impacted Minnesota history. I might kind of go off on a tangent and maybe suggest that even if there were statues in the future that might be erected of Native persons who occupied the area now known as Minnesota prior to it becoming a state and recognized as Minnesota, would that preclude those individuals from being commemorated because they weren't really Minnesotans per se? They may have inhabited this land, but it's not necessarily Minnesotans. I would also see this language as permissive language to not allow further consideration of the Columbus statue and the final disposition of that issue. It seems to me I've received a considerable amount of emails and correspondence wanting to know what's happening to Christopher from the Italian Americans, Italian Minnesotans who donated and commemorated that statue. I know there's a deeper history about this and how it's offensive to some people, but the issue is whether or not this reflects diversity as well. And so by adding this language seems to preclude the idea that we're not even going to consider any further whether or not that statue is put in. Now, Executive Secretary Merritt had mentioned that this only applies to future works of art. But I did point out in my conversation this morning with her that there are a number of other statues on the Capitol grounds that are not Minnesotans. And does that mean that they all come down too? Or is that the basis to say that they need to come down? You know, art has always been considered by many to be subjective. It is in the eye of the beholder, and the interpretation of that art means different things to different people. But I think universally people would suggest or say or agree even that art is supposed to create conversation and to be able to promote dialogue, whether good, bad, or indifferent. I serve on the trustee board over at MIA. There are many pieces of art over there that are offensive to a lot of people, yet they remain because you have conversations about these things. So I hope that it's not the intent of this language to kind of sanitize history and to create a new wokeness about art that doesn't permit, I think we've got a lot, doesn't permit the erection of certain art or allow it to remain. And, you know, I think there's a pretty thorough process of what we're going through and what we're doing in terms of adding art or removing art. But it makes it pretty clear in reading this whole document that basically not the full board, but the staff of CAP can basically rely on those 5 things to say, no, your idea is rejected. Sorry, it's not a Minnesotan. And I don't know that we should be doing that. You might have famous national figures that are important to the development of Minnesota or its history or its culture. And I just am finding objection with number 5. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Hertas. I think one piece of this is that, my understanding is that this is criteria for considering additions, not looking backwards at existing works. And I also appreciate your question about, Minnesota Makoche and Minnesota and, what does this mean for Indigenous people who are here before Minnesota was Minnesota. I think that's a thoughtful conversation that we should have. But wanted to just acknowledge that, I think this is forward-looking, but I appreciate the questions that you've raised. I know that Dr. Bean had her hand raised, and then I'm going to go to Executive Secretary Clapp-Smith. Dr. Bean.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with Representative Hertas in terms of the inclusion of Indigenous people to Minnesota. Our relatives in Santee, Nebraska and Crow Creek, South Dakota, they are Minnesotans. I myself am through and through Minnesotan, even though I wasn't given the privilege or the opportunity to be born here or raised here, coming from a tribe that was removed. But I was born a Minnesotan and always will be, and our family remains very much Minnesotan. So I think the bigger question in terms of here is, what is it we mean when we speak and say Minnesotan, and how do we make sure that that's inclusive of people who've lived here historically, who've moved over time, and or may no longer live in Minnesota, but have been Minnesotan in some context. At the same time, I also feel like the larger issue of representation here is really important in terms of, the fact that a number of people honored within the Capitol grounds are not from Minnesota and are not Minnesotans actually speaks to the larger issue at play here of representation. And I think what this is attempting to do is to address that issue of inclusion and lack of diversity in terms of who is represented. If we are going to add more and honor other people within these Capitol grounds, we want to be more inclusive of the diverse populations within Minnesota. And so in that regard, it makes sense for individuals to have that sort of connection to Minnesota in that way. But how we outline what is a Minnesotan, I think is something to discuss as well.
Thank you, Dr. Bean. Executive Secretary.
Yeah, I wanted to note that in the current policy, the existing policy document language, Section 1 is titled the Act of Commemoration, and there are 2 elements of that: to preserve and commemorate the diverse people of Minnesota and their values, and then to inform and enrich the urban context. So I think this is a great discussion. Who are the people of Minnesota? Who are Minnesotans? What does it mean to commemorate the diverse people of Minnesota, like in our existing language? So just adding that.
Thank you. Representative Hertas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just a brief comment. I guess it almost seems redundant. Maybe that's not the right word. It's kind of ironic that we use the word inclusive, and we want to be inclusive, but we have to be exclusive that it can only be Minnesotans. So I find inclusiveness to be a little broader than just Minnesotans. So anyway, thank you for that.
No, I appreciate that, Representative Hertas. And I think with regards to the Columbus statue, I think this process in general, it started because we wanted to make sure that there was a process for the removal of commemorations, of monuments. But I hear you, and I appreciate, as someone who also receives correspondence from constituents, what it is that you're hearing from the folks that you represent and others across the state. Are there any other additional questions about this particular piece? I will come to Merritt Clapp-Smith and then to Kate Bean. Go ahead, Executive Secretary.
Yeah, I want to note a procedural item that might be important to consider in this kind of thing. And that is when you release rules for comment, it's better if you include things that maybe people are uncertain about or waffling on, because then you get to test them through the public hearing process and the 30 days leading up to that. If you don't include them and see if they come up or there seems to be interest, you may not eventually be able to add them to the rules if they're considered a substantive enough item that they need a new round of notice of intent to adopt in a hearing. So just want to put that out there too. If the board's kind of on the hump on something, you might want to lean towards including it with the idea that it may, you may find that it doesn't pass the muster of the public hearing process.
I appreciate that, and knowing that there's opportunities for folks and Representative Hertas and others to encourage people to participate in the comments on that particular section as well. Dr. Bean, and then I'm going to keep moving us along. I think we want to talk about the funding piece, and then if there's a larger discussion, I'd love to be able to have it. So Dr. Bean.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to mention for the record, I think that, just a reminder that we do have limited space on the Capitol grounds, and that it's important to think about the fact that it's not, in my personal opinion, and I think in the opinion of a lot of community members that come from marginalized communities that have historically been underrepresented, is that it's not exclusive to allow space for representation that has historically been left out. Prioritizing marginalized voices and people is not an exclusive act. That's an inclusive act. And I just want to state that for the record. Pidame.
Noted. Thank you. Executive Secretary, let's continue to move forward here. I know that we have an additional section that we'd like to talk about with regards to funding, and there was considerable interest at the last meeting to speak to the burden, frankly, of raising funds for commemorative works activity. So I would note that the funding requirement already exists in our process for adding commemorative works and would simply apply in the proposed rules for modifications or removal. So in our short time since the last meeting, it looks like the staff have done some good work to further the research on this topic. So Executive Secretary, if you could walk us through that, I would appreciate it.
Yes. So in looking around at what's happening across the country in relation to commemorative works and situations where decisions are being made to add or particularly to modify or remove works, people are finding themselves with suddenly doing something that nobody's budgeted for. And so in a lot of these cases, people outside of the governmental entity are stepping in to help pay for activities that are supported by the community or the local government. And these organizations that we've found working in different places, it's a full range from nonprofit organizations, crowdfunding, chambers of commerce, major sports leagues, or captains of or heads of teams, owners, and in some cases, public funds are being authorized by state or local governments. So this is to say, you know, as we have in our existing policy for additions, the applicant has the responsibility to fundraise for the cost of adding the new work. And removal and modification, this same process could occur. And it seems that there's a lot of interest out there right now, particularly in figuring out how to support efforts for removal or modification of works that people don't feel reflect the values that they want in their community anymore. So in the rules, we don't identify funding sources, nor would it be appropriate to do so in a rules document. So we don't have any change at this point proposed. The applicants of any of these processes would still be responsible for identifying available and committed funding to proceed with the work. And sorry, there is one more item. So in the current policy document, and at the end of it, procedures for initiating, implementing commemorative work, the conditions of construction include that 20% of construction cost is set aside for future maintenance. So that's the one mechanism we have, or explicit mention of kind of an additional fund that's set aside for future maintenance of the works. Thank you.
Thank you, Executive Secretary. Members, do you have questions or reflections on this? I think, you know, mine generally is that part of our role as the CAP board, if folks are interested, is also letting them know about some of the various ways that these things have been funded. But I'm curious to hear thoughts from others. Perhaps that is our tone to move on if people don't have any additional questions or comments. I do think just generally that I appreciate the thought that has gone into this and just the concern of this board about the financial obstacles to participating in this process. And so I think it's something that we should continue to be mindful of, and as we are doing a better job of just engaging with the public, that I am encouraged that these additional opportunities and being able to talk about these funding sources will just be more available and transparent for folks. Okay, well, I'm going to continue to move us forward. So with these updates complete, there's an opportunity now for a broader discussion from the previous meeting on a proposed expansion of our policy on commemorative works on the Capitol grounds. And I suggest that we begin with some further discussion of the proposed 10-year review process. Executive Secretary, if you could provide just a short description of the possible changes that we might consider here.
Yep, thank you. So we have two slides on this item. The first type of time-specific review that is in the proposed rules is the requirement for a 10-year review of existing artwork by the CAP board and staff to evaluate how the extent to which the artwork meets the standard and intent of the rules. You know, it could be the condition of it as well. So the current language says review existing commemorative artwork every 10 years to ensure that it meets standards and intent. I've heard input from some board members that this should be assumed to be happening on an ongoing basis, and that there doesn't need to be an explicit 10-year review requirement in the rules. And so in that spirit, we brainstormed, if there's interest by the board in changing that language. Here are two different statements that would alter it somewhat. One is to review existing commemorative artwork for compliance with the standards and intent after any update of the rules. Sorry, there's a typo in there. Should just end after the first rules. Another rewording could be, the board may, as resources allow, review existing commemorative artwork every 10 years to ensure that the artwork meets the standards and intent. So that second one is softening the language to acknowledge that there may be times when, as an agency, we are resource constrained, particularly for staff time, to jump into a 10-year review process. So I'll take thoughts on that. And this is, we're going to release these rules for intent to adopt. It's going to be a draft, so we just, need to land on what language we want in the draft that's released. I'm going to call these 1, 2, and 3 so that people can say, I like 1 or I like 3.
Members, I'd open it up for feedback or questions on 1, 2, or 3. I also want to just name for a small but mighty staff that this is asking for a 10-year review of all of the works is quite a heavy lift. So wanted to make sure though that we had this conversation. Representative Freiberg.
Just a quick question, and sorry if I missed this, but the change there, it says after any update of the rules, is that supposed to be there twice? Okay.
That's the typo.
No, that's just to see if you're awake.
Yep. Shockingly, an attorney found the update, all right, of the rules twice. Thank you. Elaine Fink, your hand is raised. Go right ahead.
Is there some way in the second one of putting the words as needed rather than just review existing for compliance, et cetera? It sounds like you're constantly doing that. It seems to me that you can't do 10 years. It puts a burden on the board, and it really doesn't make that much sense. But if you could somehow say that you could do it as needed or on a, what would be the word, sort of an existing schedule or a non-existing schedule, somehow that you could just say every few years we will take a look at some of these commemorative statues. That would put less of a burden onto the board staff, and yet get it done. 10 years as such doesn't make sense.
I appreciate that. I also want to name that for number 3, that also allows some level of flexibility there as well. But for that second, potentially adding the language as needed, I think makes sense to me. Dr. Bean.
I would just add, I think that, personally, remembering the conversations in terms of the every 10 years, I think it makes sense in regards to the fact that if we don't reflect on and look back on and take consideration every so often, then it's going, if an issue comes up, if a community has an issue, if there's a problem, then that's going to take even more time. and so not wanting to fall into that issue of something taking even more time than is necessary in the future. If there's a, maybe if something such as saying a limited review, that maybe it's not extensive and it wouldn't need to take so much time. But I think that reflecting back and thinking back as society changes and as our demographics change, to be inclusive of everybody within Minnesota, it makes sense to reflect on this every 10 years. And maybe it's just a matter of tweaking that language a little bit.
I appreciate that perspective and reflecting on the conversations you had on the task force, Dr. Bean, as this came up. I think perhaps that is the question is perhaps the rubric of what an assessment actually looks like could potentially be the question here as well. So limited and how we define that. Additional thoughts about that? That's a good point. James McLean.
I might just a thought that I keep going back and forth on this on whether we want to have a built-in 10-year review or some sort of built-in kind of proactive review, which I think it makes sense to me. I think that's kind of a prudent thing to do as an organization. Although the more I think about if we are kind of successful in our efforts to kind of engage the community more and actually put a process in place for the general public to initiate a review or initiate potential changes, which wasn't there before. So I think to me that it seems less important to have like a built-in proactive review if we're successful and it will be an ongoing effort to continue to find ways to better engage the general public. But I mean, I think the fact that there is at least hopefully there will be a process in place for it could be the board or it could come from someone outside the board to change something that is existing. I think that's really the key. So that's probably not the most helpful statement, but that's just kind of what I'm thinking about at this point. I don't think it's a bad idea to have a kind of a built-in proactive review, but I think the more important piece is what I know a lot of people have spent a lot of time on is the fact that it could come. Something could change. It doesn't necessarily have to be board initiated, and I think that's the important piece. As long as we're making that more open, transparent, accessible to the public, I think maybe a board, a reoccurring review of this entity is not necessarily as important, as long as we have a good process in place so that anyone could. I mean, it could be the board, or it could be someone outside of the board bringing it forward. It's just kind of what I'm thinking about most recently. Thanks.
I appreciate you bringing back to the underlying values of why we started this process in the first place. Thank you. Dr. Bean.
Well, my apologies. I just didn't lower my hand.
No worries. Executive Secretary, I'm curious if you have additional just comments here after hearing from some of our members.
I guess I would encourage us to pick one of the two alternatives, and maybe number 3 is a good compromise. Or you could do a hybrid of, as needed, or every 10 years as resources allow. I think just automatically saying it's every 10 years, those 10 years could just coincide with bad timing of other things. So I think it's nice to have a little bit of flexibility built into the rules. So I might suggest using the language of number 3 and saying the board will review existing commemorative artwork to ensure that it meets the standards and intent of these rules as needed or every 10 years as resources allow.
I would be comfortable with that. I'm curious to hear from other folks, but I also would encourage us, and perhaps this is the moment to put a little more work on your plate for the CAP board to think about what does, we've got the platinum, gold, and sort of silver review. What does that mean? Or what are the things that are most important to us in the review of the works? So to think about that for a future conversation so that we can shape that a bit.
Shall we move to the next time-specific item for discussion?
Yes, if there's no other comments on this particular piece, I think we can continue to move ahead.
All right.
Oh. Sorry. I'm sorry, Executive Secretary. Representative Hertas just raised his hand. Go ahead, Representative. And you are muted, Representative.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for reminding me that I'm muted. This language in its present form seems to suggest, contrary to what we talked about in the beginning, that this is about artwork that would be newly added or going forward. This seems to suggest that everything be reviewed as to whether or not it conforms with the very things that we talked about in the opening comments. So it doesn't seem to exempt that art which is already in place.
Thank you, Representative. I think the criteria that we were talking about earlier is for works into the future. This particular piece is talking not just explicitly about that, but I hear you.
I think it's a really excellent point. So if we did the review and it was determined that there's a work out there that is not consistent with the standards and intent that we'd hold new works to, or that it meets the conditions and criteria that might justify modification or removal, would the board take any action on that, or would it just note it?
That's correct, and I think that is the conversation for the board to have as each one of these it comes before us. You know, what I would also just say is that as we are putting all of this together, to your point, Executive Secretary, we are giving ourselves as a board more work in making sure that we are tending to, in a more intentional and robust way, our responsibility to the Capitol, the grounds, and the people that we serve here as well. So I think that's just important. That's a good question. Do we note it? Do we take action? And I think that is what we are tasked with as each one of these will come before us. I do have a question that maybe can speak to as we talk about review. There's a review of the commemorative works, but there's also the review that happens just looking at the wear and tear, the condition of each one of these works, and is there a particular rubric that is used now in determining which works need a little bit of TLC, and how often does that occur?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'd like to defer to Principal Planner Musty if he could maybe provide a little bit of information on that based on his experience being with the agency for a longer period of time. I know that my predecessor, Executive Secretary Mandel, did a regular walking circuit of the Capitol grounds, and if he saw a limb of a tree that was dead or a chip on a work, somebody would definitely hear about it, but I don't know what process they would then go through to decide whether or not to fix it.
Yes, I am familiar with those walking tours as well. Mr. Mussey, if you could just speak to that a bit, I'd appreciate it.
Certainly, we have to recognize the Department Administration does an incredible job continually on the smaller projects and the maintenance. It's an ongoing challenge, as is the entire mall and the landscaping of the mall that they do such a great job on. So that's an annual effort, and that is scouted out by CAP board staff, but mainly by anyone really. Is the condition, the wear and tear items. The larger renovations, for instance, the Capitol project had money left over, and that was a great opportunity to use to upgrade. I think there was close to 15 or 20 monuments that were upgraded. In terms of just condition, Advisor Bjornberg helped lead that and could comment on that if you wanted more information. Paul, former executive secretary, had given the board an update on that at one point, but that's the latest. Was the effort led by the Department Administration with Advisor Bjornberg.
Mr. Bjornberg, if you would be willing to just comment briefly on that, I think that would be helpful, because what I'm trying to get a sense of is, I understand that there's walking tours. Admin does a fantastic job of taking a look at these things, but there seems to be some kind, a process that exists already to look at just like the overall condition of the works that we have, and I'm trying to determine if there's an opportunity to perhaps weave these together in some way as well. Mr. Bjornberg.
Thank you, Chair. The project we just completed was a fairly comprehensive repair and restoration of, I believe it was 17 of the memorials on the mall. That hadn't occurred in quite a while, and that was largely due because the funds were available left over from the capital project. But I think it is something that has been short of funding to really do significant repairs and upkeep for quite a while. So this should last for a while, but anytime it goes for a long period of time, say 5 years without doing something, it will pile up and it will be more significant.
Thank you.
So we can keep good tabs on it and make a list, but the money is what makes it happen.
Absolutely, it's always resources for sure. Comes back to that. Yep. Merritt, Executive Secretary, I think you have some additional pieces here as well.
Yeah, we were just going to cover the second time-specific mention that's in the current proposed rules, and that is that the board would automatically do a 10-year review of the rules themselves and consider whether or not it wants to make some amendments, and then it would go through another fun rulemaking process. I've heard from some people, and I think I possibly concur with this, but it's up to the board, that if something is happening, that it's determined that the rules aren't serving the state of Minnesota and its people well enough in regard to commemorative works on the Capitol grounds, then at any point where that comes up and people recognize that the rules should be reevaluated, it should be done at that point, whether that's before 10 years, after 10 years. So I see this as a thing that will happen automatically whenever it's needed. However, I think I'm guessing that the proposal for this from the task forces is the idea that sometimes everybody's very busy and the status quo languishes for a very long time, and there may be things that really do need attention, but they're not getting them because of resource constraints, and putting this in the rules would compel it to occur every 10 years, whether or not people are thinking about or feeling like they have the resources to do so. Thank you. So I had suggested some language at the bottom. Every 10 years, the CAP board will review this policy to ensure that it remains accessible, accomplishable, and consistent with these guiding principles. That we would just remove that language. And it also says that the two reviews, this one and the one of the works, would be scheduled so they happen within 4 years of one another. So for you to consider, do we remove the requirement for a 10-year board review of the rules for amendment and leave it up to best judgment about when they need review, or do we leave this 10-year requirement in? Thanks.
Thank you. Members, are there questions or perhaps feedback from members who may have served on the task force? Yeah. So I would jump in here, and I would say one of the we have a series of choice points in the work that we do, and choice points around the in disrupting the status quo. And I think to the point that we were just talking about not having the resources available, I believe we actually put them in bonding requests, which we did not receive. And so the capital preservation dollars were part of that. But I'm a little uncomfortable removing the 10-year language for the review of the rules because I think that is where we get on one track, and without having those intentional choice points along the way, that is how the status quo can thrive. It is possible that a review of the rules may come up depending on who may be in these seats as they change due to election cycles and other things. But I do think maintaining the 10-year review of the rules is probably appropriate here.
One small note, if there is the desire to leave this, I think it would be good to add the language, in addition, at least every 10 years. Mm-hmm. So that makes it clear that the board can decide to do it more, with a space of 4 years if something important comes up.
I appreciate that addition, Executive Secretary. Any other questions or comments here? I believe that I believe the intent of the task force with some of this language and these reflections is around not being in a similar position to where we found ourselves without a process, and making sure that there's just regular check-ins here as well. With the regularity of 10 years, which feels like a long time. And sometimes no time at all. Time has no meaning.
It'll feel like less time the older you get.
That's right. That's exactly correct. Okay, let's continue to move forward here. Executive Secretary, are there additional pieces, anything else here that you wanted to speak to?
No, this is it for specific items in the rules. I'd be happy now to just provide a reminder on steps we have coming up in the process. The rules as written by the revisor will be released with a notice of intent to adopt when they are ready, and to proceed with the scheduled hearing with the administrative law judge on January 18th. We will need to release the notice of intent to adopt in the rules and the statement of need and reasonable that goes with that by December 18th, although I read something today, I think it might be actually December 15th, that you have to release the rules, and then there's a 30-day comment period that would run December 18th to January 18th up to the public hearing. So as I said, it's when the rules go out for comment and you hold the hearing, that does not mean that the rules don't change after that. The input will help advise the administrative law judge on what revisions to the rules would be appropriate before you would consider whether or not to adopt. There are a couple of formatting items that I'd like to work on the revisor that would just make things more clearly organized within the rules document. But I will, over the next 10 days, be firming down what language, what rules language will be submitted for that notice of intent to adopt, and complete the statement of need and reasonableness, which will be sent to you as well in advance of that. I'm getting the pop-ups of people joining the meeting. After the public hearing, we'll continue with the public comment period for up to 20 days, and then the administrative law judge considers things, makes a recommendation to the board, and then the board votes. That would be sometime next spring. So this is the same schedule we've had for some time. Any questions on that? All right, so next, the rulemaking public hearing. You will be sent much more information about this as I learn the details of, you know, are we using a Teams or a WebEx format? How are the board members expected to comment or ask questions during the hearing, or is only the administrative law judge allowed to do that? I will be finding out all those details and providing that information to you, because there is a very prescribed way in which these hearings are held. The chair of the hearing officially is the administrative law judge. I was told that it's then up to the judge to decide how long they'll let people speak, whether there's a limit on that or not. So we've scheduled the meeting for 2 hours. And I will be encouraging the administrative law judge to put some protocols in place that would enable us to have that within 2 hours. Anyway, so more information to come to you.
Great, thank you. We look forward to hearing those details, and would just encourage folks again. It is an executive secretary, correct me if I'm wrong, until December 16th right now that folks can comment on the webpage. So I would just encourage members to invite people.
On the request for comments, yes.
Yep, on the request for comments.
Yeah, but if board members are having any last minute things, let me know right away in regard to the rule language.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions or discussions here with rule language? I know that we had, there are multiple pieces that we were working through today, and I just want to make sure. And to Representative Hertas, I know that you said that you had additional comments. I want to make sure that you were able to express those if there was anything else that you wanted to contribute here to the conversation.
Madam Chair, thanks for asking. I think they've kind of inadvertently been discussed already, so we'll just keep moving on.
Okay, thank you, Representative. All right. Anything else? We've had a thorough process and discussion, lots of information. We'll make sure, again, all of these documents are available to the public. Want to make sure that folks have them, especially with the December 16th deadline. And then as we are moving towards the January 18th hearing, want folks to be able to contribute. So thank you. We are now going to move into our next agenda item, which is an update on the emergency shelter services that Ramsey County is providing for our relatives experiencing homelessness at the Bethesda site here in the capital area. And to be really candid with you, as we knew that this was coming, I was like, how has this been a year? As we were reflecting on this issue a year ago in December, when we approved the variances and conditional use programs permits to allow these services. So as I contemplated that last meeting and just how quickly time has flown, also knowing that our friends at Ramsey County and Fairview are here to provide an update, but also just that I know that a tremendous amount of good work has been done during that time, and I'm grateful for it. I also want to name that when we provided the approvals last December, as we were looking forward, it felt like we were sure to be past COVID-19 at that point, and this pandemic is an unwanted gift that just keeps giving. So with our current high case counts that have pushed our care delivery systems to the brink again, and the new concerning Omicron variant on the rise, I'm sure that we'll hear more from Mr. Lattimore on those current conditions as they continue to pose a significant risk to our relatives experiencing homelessness. So I believe that we'll get some additional background from Mr. Musty, and then hear from Mr. Lattimore, Housing Stability Director for Ramsey County, and we have additional folks here who are also from Fairview. So with that, Mr. Musty, I'm going to turn it over to you to walk us through this next piece here on our agenda.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, and I'm happy to reintroduce the board to the representatives of Ramsey County and Fairview. It's been a year, as you said, since the board members worked through in a long meeting approval for the temporary shelter and the COVID respite at Bethesda Hospital. The shelter, as you have read in the memo today and from previous updates this year, has been in full operation since the clients began visiting roughly a year ago, just before the cold weather hit. So I'm glad to report to the board from both the planner and the zoning administrator capacities that their teams have been working collaboratively, proactively, and constructively with CAAPB board staff to meet all of the conditions of their permit so far. And I will introduce. So we should have a slide up here. I'll first introduce Keith Lattimore, Director of Housing Stability for Ramsey County. He will provide an update on the shelter. Then we will welcome back representatives from Fairview, who will provide a statement about the future of the hospital after May 2022. So before that, right before Keith, I do want to mention, with Keith included, a thank you to the Bethesda Good Neighbor Group. They were formed under one of the board's conditions, and they've been meeting monthly. I'd like to thank them and call out 3 members, specifically 2 volunteers that helped me lead this group monthly. Pastor Joy McDonald Coldvet from the church next door, Hannah Hills from the Capitol Heights Block Club, and then Gene Kruger from Ramsey County as well. They've been particularly dedicated to the success of the shelter and very proactive in solving some of the issues that have come up this year. So with permission, I'll turn to Keith Lattimore.
Please go ahead, Mr. Lattimore. Welcome to our board.
Thank you, Madam Chair and fellow CAAPB board members. Happy to be here today to give our kind of brief update, our bird's eye view update of the Bethesda shelter. And so as we flip through the screen, hope Peter, looks like we lost our screen there.
We got you.
Okay. So yes, so Madam Chair, yes, virtually just about a year ago, we came, and just a huge thanks to this board for giving us the conditional use permit to be able to use Bethesda as a shelter, and also have a wing dedicated to our COVID relief efforts for our homeless individuals that's faced, that are in Ramsey County. And today, what you're seeing as kind of a snapshot of today, kind of our point in time snapshot of Bethesda. So today, the current census is 100. We have 100 individual single males that are there in the facility. And as you'll also see, we also have 18 in our COVID respite. This has been critical. And of course, through the year, we've seen variations of, peaks and valleys. But, we've had times where we've actually had no individuals that were being housed for COVID. And so that's been great. And it was to the point where we're really kind of saying, do we continue, still need that continuation? And then, of course, our variant version hit. And then now we're seeing double digits. And it's been huge to have this opportunity to relieve our fellow shelters, as well as any folks that might be homeless that may come up as COVID positive, to be able to move and get the services and have that respite care available. You'll also see on the chart that, so far, we just wanted to give you kind of that point in time, kind of, where have we been and where we are currently. So far, of our shelters, we've served roughly about 245 individuals over this past year. And we've had roughly in our COVID, as I mentioned, we've had times when we've actually been at zero, which has been great. But we have also seen, since we started kind of our shelters back going through the pandemic when it hit in March of 2020, we've roughly had about 402 individuals come through our respite. So we know that we didn't move into Bethesda until December of last year, but certainly this gives you kind of a platform to see all of the cases that we were able to prevent in our in our partner shelters in Ramsey County. So they were able to move folks from those locations into Bethesda to, to help keep those shelters operational and free of COVID. So happy to report that Bethesda has been, used in that format, and we've been happy to say that our numbers are really, really low in our partner shelters to keep those numbers, those COVID cases down. We've also continued to give work with our public health department to try to, we've offered numbers of vaccination clinics along the way throughout, the shelter network, including here at Bethesda. If you'll also look down in our chart, we're also talking about our average length of stay, just to give, kind of what's happening, who are the individuals. We did keep wraparound services, and those are services that keep folks moving along the continuum of returning into housing. Those services has remained, and they're present on the site. Our average length of stay for those who are actually exiting has been roughly about 85. We know that some individuals are further along the continuum than others. Some may need more wraparound services and involvement to maybe get jobs and other things, mental health services, and just to get them connected with health services as well. And others are more able to, move along the continuum, because they may not have as many things or needs in order to keep that continuation going. Average length of stay for our folks in respite has been 8. That number is, 8 because there are some folks who might not know that they're positive until they're further along in the, and get those. So it's not really our 10 or 14 that we're used to seeing. So those are some numbers there just for you to have a snapshot. If we look at those 100 that are in Bethesda to date and look at the average length of stay for those remaining, we've had some folks in there averaging about 171 days. So we do have individuals that are, there a little longer, but we still have those individuals moving through our network. Of those exiting into housing, I'm happy to report that at least 69 individuals, and this was taken at the beginning or about midway last month in November, we were at 69 individuals that had moved into permanent housing. Others have had different forms of housing, but we were really just wanted to give you a snapshot here to save the, without going into the big details. The way that we use individuals who are coming to Bethesda, we did work with Peter and the group as we looked at, are we going to be bringing individuals straight from unsheltered world in there? And what we did was we used Bethesda as what we call a step up part of the program, which means that individuals who have been in other shelters at least 7 days and had shown that they were able to follow the rules and move along the continuum of saying that, hey, I'm going to cooperate and try to work with individuals to move along this continuum. We brought those individuals over to Bethesda, and it's helped to make sure that we keep the neighborhood safe and we keep the building functioning in the way that we wanted to, do it the Ramsey way, if you will. How do we do it? We brought individuals. We have 24-hour site staff that's on the site. We wanted to also make sure that those individuals had knowledge of lived experiences as well as represent those who were using the services. And we did some specialized training for, those individuals and folks who were just really in the work to build relationships with individuals. We also, as I mentioned before, we kept those wraparound services in place. Nursing services, and mental health services and chemical dependency services that we have in place for those individuals. We have also 24-hour trauma-informed security that was really rooted in that de-escalation to work with individuals, and we have an understanding of these individuals and what they were going, and obviously throw a pandemic on top of all of this is really, we felt, was the best way to approach. And then finally, those pathways to housing, having those navigators to kind of maneuver, find housing, work with individuals to get jobs, and work with individuals to go out and have, rental applications and other services available to them to really navigate those individuals through those services. Just some kind of point in time updates I also thought that were relevant to maybe hearing about how has it gone there. These are just some bullet points I thought that I would be able to share. So the first thing is that Ramsey County, we've worked very closely with the community, as you've heard from Peter Musty leading up to this presentation. And the county's been very responsive to those community concerns. So we have participated in the good neighbor meetings as you've heard before, and we thought, going through, we also wanted some of those individuals who were using the services or the residents of Bethesda to be involved in those. And many of them have now participated in some of those good neighbor meetings as well, to really offer perspective from those who are using the services to, be in the conversation around what the community concerns were at the time, or what we can work towards, making sure that we can eliminate other issues that might be in the community. As you know, we have the National Night Out every year. Our residents participated right alongside our community residents. We did some things to increase security, to really make sure that the rounds and the presence of those security individuals were in the parks, around the neighborhood. People can see them. We also partnered with Capitol Police, St. Paul Police, and State Patrol just to say, hey, we're here, let's share information, let's have a presence here to make sure that our, the community stays safe. And in our good neighbor meetings, I don't want to speak for City of St. Paul, but certainly, we've learned that in the meetings that we've had, we've looked at crime rates in previous years and compared them to where we are for the current time. And we've learned that many and most areas of crime that existed in previous years around that neighborhood, where we've seen now actually that the crime rate has decreased. So, that was, we're happy to hear that, and we're happy to, continue our vigilance as well as report any incidents that we see as well in the area. We've also done some things to make sure that our staff are doing rounds as well on the campus. So if there's trash and other things that are eyesores for the community, we've, had them pick up trash and just make sure that the area maintain its, professional look. And we've also offered incentives for the residents that are there, like, doing some things like yoga and gardening and talent shows, because we know that when people are in this pandemic, that, some are inside, what are some of the things they can do to just kind of take care of themselves and also, be mindful of their mental health as well. As we look ahead, next slide, please. As we look ahead, I wanted to just kind of reiterate that, we have a conditional use permit that takes us through the end of April, and it's coming up on May. And so I wanted to give you kind of like, what does May look like? So for the county, our American Rescue Plan dollars and CARES Act dollars and some of our ESG CV dollars, which is our Emergency Solutions Grant COVID dollars, they end. And so we're looking at the funding will end at the end of this conditional use permit. And so we're wondering, like, well, what happens at that time and what does it look like? So the Continuum of Care of Ramsey County is working, and they have a work group right now to really look at what does it look like when the Ramsey County temporary emergency shelters go away, really due to, the funding going away. And so right now they're meeting every Thursday. Actually, they'll be meeting tomorrow. They meet every Thursday at 2 o'clock, and we've asked individuals from our Continuum of Care representatives to be in that meeting. We've opened it up to public as well as those with lived experiences, so they can really talk about the cliff, if we want to call it. What happens when, if we still have a need for shelters and the funding goes away? So we are asking that group to have some recommendations that will come back to the steering committee of our Continuum of Care, and we will move those recommendations up through our Continuum of Care Governing Board. And then, we will try to, figure out what those asks are. Right now, we are looking at an anticipated need of roughly about 100 to 125-ish shelter beds if we had the same population today as we would be in May. Some of our gaps have included that we still have a need for mental health. Some individuals who are not stable enough to stay indoors, we still have individuals that's out, who's living outdoors and unsheltered. And we've had some who have battled chemical dependency. And because our shelter rules don't allow individuals to obviously use drugs while they're on site or alcohol or other chemicals, some have decided not to come indoors. And so we still have individuals that are currently outside. And we know that that's a gap that we have in our homeless system here in Ramsey County. And then, of course, as you mentioned, Madam Chair, that we don't know where COVID is going. We've seen the Omicron, is the latest variant of COVID that we know is eventually going to make its way here. And we don't know what's going to happen. And if that's in May, then we don't have that place for respite. So, and then, of course, our day space to say that for those who don't come inside and overnight, what do they do during a safe day to still get connected to services that we offer? Ramsey County is partnered with the Catholic Charities here in St. Paul to work on reopening, relaunching our St. Paul Opportunity Center. And, resources are there during the day, but certainly, we want to look at another location perhaps where we can serve individuals who need those services and have access to those services. And these are all of the conversations that's happening in that work group. So for anyone who's here or any public individuals or just those who are community or have concerns, those meetings and those work groups are open. And we encourage anyone who have an interest in a solution. We need everyone, all hands on deck, to certainly be there in those meetings. And that's just kind of our quick update snapshot. I wanted to keep it brief. But also I have, I have my email here in case anyone has questions and we're not able to meet or answer any questions here, that I can certainly get back to you at other times. And so with that, I'll turn it back over to Peter, and thank you for having me.
Thank you, Mr. Lattimore. I appreciate it. I just want to name not explicitly in my role as the chair of the CAP board, but more so in our agency, Council on Homelessness. I am very familiar with the way that Ramsey County has stepped up in this moment to provide shelter. The city of St. Paul as well has been instrumental, and have you've done everything you can to meet this moment, and I just really want to acknowledge that. The issue of people experiencing homelessness or relatives who are sleeping outside was not new with the pandemic, but certainly has been exacerbated by it. We've had to get creative to find those spaces, and so we'll just look forward to continuing to get updates with regards to what where the work group arrives, but just want to say thank you, and I'm grateful that the space was available, and that you've been able to meet the needs of folks. Members, if there's any additional questions, we're happy to take those now for Mr. Lattimore. Give folks an opportunity here. If not, then Mr. Musty, if you can move us along to our representative from Fairview.
Certainly, Madam Chair. I'll simply introduce Trudy Trisla, Chief Administrative Officer, General Counsel. Also on hand will be Paul Onifer, Vice President of Facility Operations, and Karna Halverson, Vice President, Senior Associate General Counsel.
Yeah, thank you all. And Madam Chair and CAP board members, I really was reflective as you framed this conversation, because it was well framed. I have to admit, I did not anticipate when we were here in December that we would have headlines at this point about the surges in our hospitals and the continuing impact on our healthcare providers, and variations that continue to impact our patients in our community. So it is a varying world and a varying situation that the pandemic continues to present us. And so I just want to first comment and also echo your comments in support of the work that we were able to help with Ramsey County. Mr. Lattimore did a wonderful job of explaining the status, but also having had the pleasure to observe the operations there. We have just been very pleased as an organization that we were able to help Ramsey County meet that exigent need in the circumstances, and have been really just supportive of the work they're doing, including trying to help with things like an on-site nurse that have been helping the residents of the shelters. So have been very, very happy to do that, and very supportive of the work that they have done. I know this was a regularly scheduled update relative to plans for the site. And I just want to comment that I do have another commitment. So I'm joined by Paul Onifer and Karna Halverson. So if I need to exit, they will take over for me. But just a little comment on future uses of the site. We, at this point, are really pleased to communicate that we have the opportunity to transition the site back to its original use, and use as a hospital serving the mental health needs of adult and geriatric patients and patients with intellectual disabilities with a partner. We obviously, that is a need as well, and we have seen that need emerge during this pandemic as well. So we as an organization have been working hard with this to develop this relationship with a partner so that we can support those set of operations and utilize the site for those purposes. We are in the process of accompanying processes that are needed to support the transition of the site, and are also continuing cementing the partnership relationship. And so we'll be happy to provide more details as that is finalized, and we'll be working closely with the CAP board administrators to do that. Again, just really excited about the work we've been able to do in these last few months and are excited about the future of the site as well. I will also comment, just of interest, is that while details are still being developed, we don't anticipate any differences in terms of things like use of the green space and maintenance of that area. And so, again, are working through the details of the partnership that will be able to provide more information to you at future meetings. So why don't I pause there, and I'm happy to answer any questions or provide any additional information.
Thank you, Ms. Trisla. Are there any questions from members? Well, thank you so much for that update. We really look forward to additional conversations about the development of the site. I think knowing that there is a relationship with between many of our community members who are experiencing homelessness and mental health, and frankly, just the lack of, we talk about needing to invest in mental health systems. We don't have a system, frankly, yet in this state. So I am eager to learn more about how this is coming online, and just appreciate that. The beauty is that you have a lot of community engagement and support and relationships already built in around the Bethesda site, and so I just hope that you can call on those and the partners here and the people who sit at this board table as well, as you're moving forward. So I'll ask one more time if members have any questions. Okay, thank you so much, Ms. Trisla, for that update. Oh, Mr. McLean, go right ahead.
Yeah, I was just curious if there's any sense. It sounds like still a lot of details to work out, but any sense of timeline for a next update, or when we'll know, when you can share more about the partner, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So I know you have a meeting in January, and so we will certainly be able to provide more details in terms of the site and the services and the partner at that time. And we'll be working with the leadership of the CAAPB board to work through any processes so prior to that board meeting as we work through those details.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Mr. Musty, is there anything else that you'd like to add here as part of this update?
No, not at this time. Nope.
Okay. Well, thank you. And we look forward to hearing more developments as we move into the future. All right, members, we are moving right along here. So your packet for this meeting included a number of updates in a memo from Mr. Musty on other projects in the capital area, which are listed here on this slide. In the interest of time, we will forego asking Mr. Musty to repeat this information to all of you verbally, but we do have an opportunity if any members have any questions or comments about the items that are listed in front of us. Going once, going twice. Okay, just encourage you to review those items in your packet if you haven't already. As always, our incredible CAAPB board staff are available to you if you have any additional questions or comments. I'm going to continue to keep moving us forward here. And our final item today, we'll take up the approval of the minutes from our September 28th board meeting. Board members, you have received the draft minutes in your November meeting materials. And I would actually just begin here with just a minor correction on page 3, as I am proud to note that unlike our November meeting, in September we successfully concluded the meeting just a few minutes ahead of schedule at 2:55 p.m. rather than 3 p.m. as listed. And I'm going to take that victory lap as the chair. If there's any other edits to the minutes? Great. So with that, I will ask to approve the minutes, to approve the meeting minutes from September 28th as amended. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, so I have a motion by Freiberg, seconded by Fink. We'll now proceed to a roll call vote, this time in alphabetical order on the motion. Dr. Bean.
Aye.
Ms. Felton.
Aye.
Ms. Fink.
Aye.
Representative Freiberg.
Yes.
Representative, or Mr. Grundhauser. Mr. Grundhauser.
Star 6.
You can star 6 to unmute, Mr. Grundhauser. I'm going to keep moving along here. Representative Hertas.
Hertas votes aye.
Mr. McLean.
Aye.
Senator Pappas.
Aye.
Mr. Yang.
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. The motion is approved and the September 28th, 2021 minutes are confirmed. So members, this brings us to the conclusion of our agenda today for the meeting. Thank you again so much for the discussion and your attention today. These are not always easy topics, and they are made even more challenging by the circumstances necessitating our virtual meetings. But I do so much appreciate everyone's willingness to dig in and to potentially give ourselves more work as we move into the future. But I appreciate it. So I will look forward to seeing you all again in the new year at our next meeting, which is January 18th at 1 p.m. You receive a series of emails from CAP board staff and from the executive secretary with the materials for review in advance of the meeting, which will include a public hearing on the proposed commemorative works rule. I hope you will take time to familiarize yourself with these materials and any additional information as it is distributed. And as always, the executive secretary will be available as you encounter any questions. So I just wanted to again, just say, I know that this has been a tremendous amount of work. Senator Pappas, I see that you will be on a Metro bonding tour that day. We appreciate that work as well, of course. But if you have any additional questions or things that you'd like to be part of discussion, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. And just again, the CAP board is a place and space where we have taken on some really important discussions about the kind of capital, the kind of community that we want to build here. And I'm really grateful to be part of that with all of you. So if there aren't any additional questions, comments, or snide remarks, I will wrap us up and just say to everyone, please be safe, take care of yourselves, have a wonderful holiday season, Happy New Year, and we will see you soon. Take care.
See you, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.